welcome to 10 Very Big Books, a Malazan Readthrough podcast. My name is Peter Bond, and with me today is our producer, AJ Fileri.
Hello, I'm here. Quickly swallowing the boba that I had in my mouth because you didn't say you were starting.
How are the levels, the bars, the boba?
The boba's great, as always. I'm a taro boba fool, and the bars are looking great.
I don't know much about the different types of boba, so...
Yeah, I don't know. Taro, I don't know. It's taro root. I don't really know what it is. It looks like a purple ginger, but I can't really describe the taste because it kind of just tastes like bubble tea to me.
Anyway, let's get the show started. 10 Very Big Books is a Malazan read-through podcast, as you probably know. But it started off with me, India Jones, and Joshua Baker.
And a dream.
And a dream. And one podcast producer who was not on the show proper, rather just doing the mixing, making the bars, making the levels all flat and smooth. But then, cut to House of Chains. This producer wanders onto the show. Wanders onto the stage.
Yeah, I emerged from the mist.
So, tell me, Aj, what had happened with books 1 and 2 and 3, and then, like, you getting on the show?
Yeah, so, well, I mean, when you came to me with this idea a while ago, you'd said something about a 10-book series. It's very big, it's very high fantasy, very dense, notoriously... not difficult, but there's a lot in it.
Has a reputation.
Has a reputation. And I thought, this sounds like a cool idea for a podcast. I will never touch these books, ever in my life.
Yes, you were pretty resolved.
I'm not a big reader, really, at all. And even so, now, I wouldn't call myself a big reader. I'm a big reader of Malazan books now, but I'm not very much a big reader. So after editing the first season of the show through Gardens of the Moon, I thought, wow, this book's doing a lot of stuff. I think if I read it alongside the podcast, I could actually work through these books because the click that we go through is pretty reasonable. Like 3 or 4 chapters every 2 weeks is pretty reasonable to me.
Oh my God, definitely. Yeah. Keep going.
So that definitely took a lot of the pressure off. So when you started recording Deadhouse Gates, I thought, okay, I will read right before I edit the show. So I read about the first 10 chapters of Deadhouse Gates, and then for one reason or another fell off, I don't know, time or, working, and then also editing the podcast. I don't know, whatever. I stopped reading Deadhouse Gates. So finished the second season of the podcast, and I thought, wow, these books are really good. They seem really good.
Memories of Ice comes around.
And then Memories of Ice comes, and you had said Memories of Ice. I think you said something along the lines of, like, it's the most accessible book in the series because it's just like, it is a fantasy novel. Like, fully up and down, you're making
up. Yeah, I don't know how I characterized it then, but I broadly agree. It's a pretty easy book to get into, I think.
So at that point, I decided, well, I need to actually, lock in and do it with it. So I had read... before I edited every one of these episodes for Memories of Ice. I had a great time. Memories of Ice, incredible book, all-time great, highly recommend, amazing time. So then in the off-season, between Memories of Ice and House of Chains, Pete and I were talking, and I had been in our group chat talking about how much I loved this book.
Well, the thing is, every week when you were reading Memories of Ice,
right,
like you would just be blasting us with your Memories of Ice opinions,
right? And because it was the only space that I had to yell about these books because we didn't have the Discord yet, so I was just yelling at my friends because I didn't know where else to go. And then I think I brought the idea up in one of our production meetings in the off season of me maybe coming on in the 4th season for House of Chains in kind of a like other side of the glass producer role where, like, I'll give my input every once in a while, but I'm not necessarily like a co-host on the show.
I think that's how we initially envisioned it.
Yes, that was definitely the initial pitch. But I think we've kind of strayed.
I had a concern that 4 would be too many people on the show.
Yeah, and I definitely shared that concern. And like, I have experience in radio production, like live radio. So I was kind of comfortable being, quote unquote, behind the board, just like hitting the buttons or whatever. And then, giving my input every once in a while. And then that really turned into me just like coming with quotes every week. And then,
well, I guess you're a big note taker.
Well, okay. So I wasn't reading these books, and reading these books for the podcast have changed the way that I consume this particular series. Because I had found in the early episodes of House of Chains, I was just reading the book, I would read the chapters, and then I would come onto the show, and I would feel really unprepared to contribute, I guess, if Peter would ask me a question or whatever. So I guess about halfway through House of Chains, I started taking notes, just general notes about each section of each chapter. And that really helped me kind of hone in exactly the stuff that I wanted to bring up. And that was when I kind of started bringing quotes as well. And now that is how I have read Midnight Tides and how I'm currently reading Bone Hunters.
I mean, now, if anything, you're so prepared you're putting the rest of us to shame. You know?
Thanks. Oh, you know what? Actually, at like halfway through Midnight Memories of Ice was, I think, when we had started the Discord, I think. And I had said that I was reading the books and people were, I don't remember how the idea came up, but I started giving my thoughts on these sections at the end of the episode. And it was making my outro thing like 5.5 minutes long, which was just unconscionable.
Because you read it during Memories of Ice, because you kept...
Right.
My memories, can you imagine?
I mean, it was only 2 books ago, I guess 3 books ago now, but it was also, a year and a half or whatever. So we've done a lot between then.
Which, at this point, the listener, I'm sure we titled the episode, but we haven't really introduced what we're doing, right? And we're building up because we've now finished Midnight Tides, book 5, ba-boom. And we're going into Bone Hunters. We've actually recorded 2 episodes now. Uh-huh. And we felt like I kind of told AJ.
Yeah, I'm going to say you felt.
I felt very strongly. I was like, well, if... you're here, you're a host now. You're essentially on the show full time, Right. Going into the back half of the series, I think you need to have read Gardens of the Moon, Deadhouse Gates. I don't think... I know you edited those episodes and you kind of have a gist of what it is. I just thought, if we're really going to be on the show and we're going to have these conversations, you needed to have been through those stories. Right. So we took a bit of a longer break in between Midnight Tides and Bone Hunters, a break we're in right now. And during this time, you sat down and got through both Gardens of the Moon and Deadhouse Gates. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what we're going to do here today, because you took 2 stabs at them that long time ago, but you finished the stories, and we just wanted to give some space on the podcast to kind of, double back and hear AJ what you think about these 2 books and talk about what they mean for you reading them here, since you did this weird 3, 4, 5, 1, 2 order. But
yeah.
But it's
the
all
Malazan machete order, I guess.
The Malazan machete order. Jump in at 3. But listen, it all worked out. So let's get the episode started then.
Yep.
Gardens of the Moon. Ganos Perrin, Moonspawn Darujistan, the Assassins, Amanda Ray, Krupp, I could just keep listing proper nouns. So, I don't know, book 1, baby. What'd you think? It's so big. What angle do you want to start the conversation from?
Yeah, I don't even know. So the way that I read these books, I started out just reading them straight up. And then I quickly realized
You did some audiobooking,
yeah,
right?
I did the second half of Gardens of the Moon audiobook, and then I did all of Deadhouse Gates audiobook, but for a good portion of it, I had the book in front of me while I was listening to the audiobook, just to kind of keep me on track, I guess, to stop me from getting distracted or anything, just so that I would have okay, well, this chapter is going to take me an hour or whatever, and then no matter what, the chapter would take me an hour.
I'm on the edge of my seat over here, bro. What you think of Gardens of the Moon?
Gardens of the Moon, all in all, I think is an extremely good book. I had a great time reading it. It was not hard for me at all. I knew what all the words meant.
I think that's a real difference. I'm interested here because I know for me, the first, my impression of the book was so formed by me struggling through it the first time I read the series. And obviously you did not have to do that. What is Malazan? How does Steven Erikson write a story?
Right. Yeah, one of them, my first note is I kind of wish I could experience this, quote unquote, properly, not knowing what was happening, but
it's a real per reader thing. Some people really don't have a problem with the book.
Yeah. And I think I definitely would have if I didn't have all this context that I have built up previously. But I think it allowed me to enjoy this book, not as the first in the series, but just as another entry in the series. Because, more or less, I know where these storylines go because
Sure.
I've read 3, 4, and 5. I guess 3 and 4 because 5 doesn't really count. So I kind of knew like what characters to kind of hold on to and which ones to kind of not give too much of a crap about, which I feel like was a thing that India and Josh really struggled with when they were reading through the series initially, because I just remember, I think it was India talking about all the names that came up and how little so many of them mattered.
No.
But I mean, this whole book, I think, did just a really great job of setting the stakes, setting up like, you know, what magic looks like in this world, like what the Deck of Dragons is. It really tries to drive home like what the Deck of Dragons does and what it means to be able to read a Deck of Dragons and all this stuff. And there's also a lot of, I definitely would not have picked up on this, I don't think, a lot of talk of chaos. A lot of talk of chaos and the space between Warrens. And that's something I definitely would not have picked up on if I was reading this for the first time.
No, you're dead on. Chaos is introduced and like an important foundational world building concept, but it is really only touched upon in Gardens of the Moon so explicitly. Yeah,
which is wild because I don't think it ever came up on the show.
No, we talked about it for sure.
Yeah? All right. I mean, it was a while ago. So, man, there's just so much in this book. I love the bridge burners. I guess I haven't actually seen the proper bridge burners in the series yet.
Yeah, let's talk about the bridge burners. We got to kind of find our way into the book since there's so many different angles to it, right?
Right, yeah.
So what, you know, as you said, you haven't really been with them. In fact, you know, they're in Memories of Ice. That is a kind of bridge burners heavy book, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, that's fair. I guess I kind of misspoke. But what did you think about being introduced to them like this, Perrin's introduction to them, and then their kind of Darujistan mission?
Yeah, Perrin's, I had no recollection of Perrin's introduction to the bridge burners, of like being appointed by Lacine to be this new captain, and he's just like this noble-born kid who doesn't really, you know, have experience or whatever. And I think really it established Perrin as a character that I didn't think he was in this book. Like, I thought in this book I thought his arc, rather, was more of like a Crocus kind of arc, where like he started out kind of like incompetent and like silly and stuff in this book, and then in like Memories of Ice, he kind of, you know, buckles down because he's got that Hound of Shadow inside him. So he, you know, got dark and gritty. But like this whole book, he is just a great character. I love his entire arc in this book.
A quick point. I don't think he doesn't have a Hound of Shadow inside him, but I know you're just briefing.
Whatever.
Yeah. I get it.
Sure.
So I agree. I think there's a major difference, especially compared to some other characters. Like, he is inexperienced, but he's not incompetent.
Right.
He is kind of more entering a world that is outside his depths. So I think it's more about him like rising to these positions where he's dealing with all these conflicts at the height of the Elder Gods, or these, you know, that's we were just talking about in Bone Hunters, but in this book of imperial politics and all this stuff, and he is less familiar with that world. It's not that he's like, oh no, my shoes, or I don't know. That was my incompetent person impression.
Yeah, that was great. No, yeah, exactly. He comes in as someone who's like, okay, I'm working for the Empire, just like doing my thing. And then as he approaches the bridge burners, they're like, no.
Like, no, you're like, fuck you.
Yeah, like be a person with your own thoughts, which I thought was just really funny. When he gets murdered, that happened so early. That happened so early on in the book. It really surprised me. I had to like go back and read that section.
I think him getting murdered is like kind of inspired. You know, I have a bunch of problems with Gardens of the Moon, as you well know.
Sure.
But like, I just think that's kind of such a great subversion of this idea that like, here's the captain, he's coming to his post, it's the start of our story. Oh, his soldiers kill him, we're done.
Yeah, well, and that combined with the fact that he is the first person we meet.
Oh, yeah. He's kind of cast. He is kind of cast as the main character in that book.
Right. Because we start with him as a kid, you know, giving shit to that sergeant or whoever. And then it's like, oh, several years later.
He's talking to Whiskey Jack.
Was that Whiskey Jack? I don't. There's so much Malazan in my brain right now.
Yeah, well, you crushed 2 books and you've been reading Bone Hunters, so you got to be a bit all over the place. In addition to Perrin, we're also kind of introduced to Sari as one of the main characters of the story. Mm-hmm. And you've been reading Apsalar.
Yeah.
But what did you make of reading Sari in this book, which is such a really important book for her character?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously there's so much in this book about Sari and her transition into Apsalar. And first of all, I didn't think she was a POV character, which was just wild to me, that we got her POV because she's possessed by a god. And like, that's not we don't usually see that, what the gods are doing until, I guess we only see Cotillion more or less. I don't know, maybe that's wrong. Anyway, but seeing Sari be, a child with a god inside and like know what's happened, like I know what's happening, was really interesting because I was looking at it of like the whole time that she was Sari, I was looking at it through the lens of like, this is Cotillion. Like Cotillion is doing these things.
Sure.
And then once she is dispossessed, unpossessed, when she turns into Apsalar, which actually that Apsalar isn't an Apsalar that I had ever seen before. Like that's just straight up, her being that Fisher girl again. Like when she first gets unpossessed, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, it's kind of a bridge into Deadhouse Gates Apsalar, which is another character you hadn't really known.
Right. Yeah. So I thought her character was super fun to read. Just a wild POV, and it's just like the Cotillion that we know now. We just talked about it in the latest Bone Hunters episode. The Cotillion that we know now is like, kind of show-offy and like a little bit goofy and, has his feet
He's got a bit of a zest to him.
Right. He has like been ascended. He knows what it's like to be this person. But when he's possessing Sari, it's still kind of like Dancer, I think. They're kind of just like an edgy assassin who like knows that they're better at killing than everybody else is. So that was just really interesting to read as well. And I think gives more of an arc to Cotillion because like is Cotillion in Memories of Ice? I don't think so.
I kind of disagree, but
okay.
I shan't expound more. But I just wanted to note my dissent.
Well, wait, why don't you want to expound?
Well, all I feel is that Cotillion as a character like has his wits about him and is like a brutal dude with a plan. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like, sure, there's all these other things about him, and you can like get lost in the whatever. I feel the same thing with Shadow Throne. Mm-hmm. Sure, you can get lost in the sauce thinking about whatever they're doing with their hands or something, but like, they got their eye on the prize. They're like they're doing something. They're like scheming. This is like a defining aspect of them.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that I think Cotillion's not scheming in these later books. It's just like because of what he did to Apsalar, he has like, stakes elsewhere in a way of actual feelings about a thing that he has done.
I do agree that in this book, especially since you don't really yet know that Shadow Throne and Cotillion are Dancer and Killenbed. In this book, I do think is when they appear the most kind of self-serious, or the book presents them that way. That they're behind this veil and it's the god of assassins and whoa. And then like, kind of that guard is let down and we spend more time with them as like, shooting the shit and like, people. So I agree in that regard. So we touched on Sari. Also within this Bridge Burners squad, we got, Whiskey Jack and the crew, Kalam Quick Ben,
Mm-hmm. Seeing Whiskey Jack again / for the first time made me really sad. And the whole time I was reading, it's like, when's he going to hurt his foot? When's he going to hurt his foot? Or knee, whatever it is that gives out.
Knee, it happens at the Fete.
Yeah. Yes, it does happen at the Fete. But the whole time I was like, okay, well, it's going to be some like innocuous thing that we're not going to think about.
It's laid on pretty thick. Like immediately after it happens, someone's like, "Whiskey Jack, you should really fix your knee." And then it starts almost immediately.
Yeah, oh jeez. He immediately starts setting it up as like, oh, well, he's not going to let this heal properly. But getting Kalam and Quick Ben, I thought was great because I had only experienced their dynamic via the podcast because they're not in, Deadhouse.
Yeah, we're touching on them now in book 6, but they're mostly here.
Yeah, they talk a bit in Deadhouse Gates, just through the stone or whatever, and Quick Ben sends the trade guilds thing, but like they're not hanging out at all in any of these other books. So in this book, to see them to have them together, just like being bros, being old friends was really wild. And I think I didn't catch on to this until I started the audiobook. And I think I told you this, Pete. I wasn't reading Quick Ben as like frantic and kind of afraid a bit all throughout Gardens of the Moon until I started listening to the book rather. And Ralph Lister does a great job, by the way.
Divisive take. Some people don't like Ralph.
I think, I mean, I listened to a bit of Bone Hunters just to see what it was like as well. I think that guy also does a great job. I think they're two totally different vibes.
Michael Page. They are really different vibes.
Yeah, but I really do enjoy Ralph Lister's frantic Quick Ben all throughout Gardens of the Moon, just like trying to hold it together, like knowing that something's up and, you know, kind of being afraid to do anything. And especially because the Warrens are being assaulted at that point.
I think Ralph Lister does a good job, but definitely is laying it on pretty thick, you know?
Yeah.
He's like having fun with it. In a big
absolutely.
way. He's like doing a lot of voices.
Ralph Lister does a lot of voices. It wasn't really until like halfway through, maybe 3/4 of the way through Deadhouse Gates, was like, he's done this voice before.
Yeah. Anyway, quick audiobook sidetrack.
Yeah. So yeah, Quick Ben was great. Kalam was great. I think they described, I mean, in Deadhouse Gates, they did describe Kalam as like a big dude, but I think it was really, when you first are introduced to Kalam, he's this like hulking guy who's also this magic assassin, which is just like, whenever I was reading him through House of Chains, I just wasn't seeing this like buff dude, and now that's all I see.
Here's a question for you, bring it up to the abstract.
Yeah, baby.
How do you feel about this imperial conquest of Ganabakis and, you know, their desire to conquer Darujistan, you know?
I think I'm going to disappoint you because, as I've said on the podcast previously, a lot of the like imperial conquest and like war planning talk like goes right over my head. But in this book, I don't know. There was so much other stuff happening in this book that was so low on my radar.
Sure, I get that.
Like, I know.
Here's why I'm bringing it up. Is because I like these characters. Of course, I enjoy having a good time with them. But especially in this book, I, of course, like almost everyone in Darujistan more, and also think they are in this position of like fighting colonizers who are trying to conquer their city. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And like I enjoy the bridge burners, but also recognize like I know it's a more complicated thing than that, especially when you get into the actual situation the bridge burners are in. But like I am never like, man, I hope the Malazans win the day and conquer this city. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the only times I'm rooting for a side or like rooting for the bridge burners or anything is when it's like the tyrant or some sort of like existential threat. I'm like, man, I sure hope humanity wins. And it's not like I sure hope the Malazans win, you know? Like when, even in Memories of Ice, like when they're fighting the Panyan Daman, I was like, man, I hope they beat these cannibals. Like the bar is so low.
Yeah, I guess I still always like kind of has my backup about that because it still feels like I'm being forced to root for them, you know?
Sure, I get that. Yeah.
Just a side note, someone on the Discord used the phrase "get your backup," which is a phrase I had never heard before, and I now use all the time.
It's a good phrase.
It's a great phrase. Love it. 10 out of 10. Anyway, so touch on that, but let's go in, now that we talked about it, let's go inside the city of Blue Flame. Darujistan, baby. Honestly, probably my favorite setting in the books.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love Darujistan as a setting. Like, I've constantly been thinking about it as just like a place. And, you know, I play a fair amount of Dungeons and Dragons. And I just think like how dynamic and wild of a setting Darujistan is.
I think the whole world is just clearly seems like a hoot to game in, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it just rings of that type of world, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, literally made to be that. But
Yeah, of
I
course.
think just, the way that it's described and just the life that it has, Darujistan, is nuts. It's so cool.
Here's just total sidetrack. Then we should get back to Gardens of the Moon.
Sure.
So, like, I love playing Dungeons and Dragons and these games, right? Mm-hmm. And something I love about, like, I like these settings, the setting of Malazan, right? But I guess part of me has this weird thing, especially since we didn't create the world, right? Mm-hmm. Where it seems like it's really thought out and that there's stuff that is in the world, there's stuff that isn't in the world. There's these rules and they're kind of unchanging. You know, there's this stuff, there's not this stuff, which is fine. You know, of course, you know, but also the rules do seem a little fuzzy, right? And that's fine too. But I think something I love about in role-playing games and in Dungeons and Dragons or something, like if I'm playing D&D and we opened up the cabinet and literally anything could be in it is how I feel. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Like it's like one of the pros and the cons of the D&D setting is how generic it is. Do you mean if we open it up and it was a leprechaun, it would be like, oh my God, we're doing leprechauns,
Right,
you know?
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like kind of this joy that like what's in that corner? It's Santa Claus. Santa Claus is here. Thank you, C.S. Lewis. I'm so stoked. You know?
Yeah.
But it's also the kind of the con if it's just like, you know, no rules, just right, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think when I think about the Malazan world in a role-playing sense, I'm like, man, I kind of wish there was like a bit more leprechauns shit.
I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I think like just the introduction of the Jagged Tyrant and like we're spending all this time in Darujistan doing all this stuff and like we know we've seen maybe dragons in the distance. That's not crazy fantasy stuff. I mean, it is crazy fantasy stuff, but it's not like too out there. But then once we start getting to like the Jagged Tyrant like emerging and then like, yeah, he points a finger and blows a mountain up, which was just like blew my mind.
Raced has such a great introduction.
Yeah. I think that's something that Steve does really well throughout all the books that we've read is like, especially in book 5, I think, just the sheer amount of power that a being can hold and how to make it like horrifying. I think he is very good at showing like intense amounts of power.
Do you think the Jagged Tyrant's a weakness of the book?
I don't think it's a weakness, but it did. I don't know. I think coming into it, I thought that was the climax. Like, I thought that was going to be the climax of the book. When in reality, it felt like it was just like a separate thing that happened that didn't really affect the book. It seems like I kept thinking this as I was reading it. It seems like it would be a really cool thing for if you were role playing, like if we were playing D&D and we're at the Fete and we're doing this stuff and we're going to have there's going to be a duel and like, wow, cool. And then, you know, as you guys are fighting, the DM is like, oh, in the distance, you see this dragon spraying these 5 dragons spraying fire down at something and a mountain blows up, but we're back here and we're still doing this duel. Like in the book, I don't know if it really did much for the story, but it definitely did show like what this world is capable of, I think. 'Cause up until that point, like the most wild stuff we had seen was, God, I don't even know. I guess the assassin stuff, like that stuff got pretty nuts, I suppose, but nothing
And
like Raced.
It's one of those things that kind of gets loopy because you did this 3, 4, 5, 1, 2 order where,
Well, yeah.
you know, the first time you're reading it, you don't really know what the Jagged are or like anything about them. You know, really
Right.
all you know is a little bit about the Talani Mass, and then the Jagged are defined in their relationship to the Mass, you know?
Right.
So it's a kind of different type of emergence into the story.
Yeah, I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if it was my first time reading, I think I would have been like blown away by that part because, and I mean, I think in some ways I still kind of am because it does, like I said, do a great job of showing you like there's more in this world and you should be afraid of it because we spent so much of this book, you know, setting the stakes within the city and setting the stakes of the Empire and the Bridge Burners and the Assassin's Guild and all this stuff. And it's like that could be a fantasy novel. And then all of a sudden we got a giant blowing up mountains with his mind.
A giant?
Whatever.
We are not going to get to everything in this book, not even close.
No.
and you read Deadhouse Gates. We are up Schitt's Creek with this podcast, brother.
I was just thinking like, man, and I thought I had more to say about Deadhouse Gates, but we'll see.
I was just like, man, I was really thinking about how we've barely touched on the book. I mean, we're like a few inches deep into this bad mamma jamma.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to listen to a podcast that's about the specific events of the book, like there's already podcasts for that. You know, this is about how I feel about it. All right. This is my podcast. This is my world.
Anyway, let's get back to Guards of the Moon. So, let's talk about Darujistan. We touched on it as a setting itself, but of course in it is Crocus Younghand, the single greatest character in the series, along with several other of his fun supporting friends. Which one did you grab onto?
I mean, I immediately grabbed onto Crocus because he's a character that I've been with. So all those characters that I have encountered in other books, it's like, okay, cool. This is fun to see where they started. And I think I fully knew almost all of Crocus's arc in this story.
Sure.
Just coming in, because it's not too nuts. He like falls in love with a girl and does a bunch of dumb stuff. That's kind of his arc throughout this. Not to offend Pete, I'm sorry.
No, that sounds like Crocus to me.
Krupp, as always, is obviously... I'm a huge fan.
Also, falls in love with is an interesting way to characterize it.
He thinks he falls in love with.
Yeah.
Krupp is great. I think Baruch is actually a really interesting character. I didn't know Crone was in this book, and I loved Crone in Memories of Ice. I don't know if that's a weird take or whatever, but I love Crone, and the fact that she was in this book was so good. It was content that I didn't know I wanted, and content that I didn't know was in the book. So I was really, really hot on all the Crone stuff.
I like how Crone's a little sassy, because I think when you talk about that type of raven crow imagery, it's like usually it has this like thus spoke what's the poem,
The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe.
But what's the line in The Raven?
Spoke the raven nevermore.
Yes, okay, exactly. There's this imagery, and it's like all gothic and severe, and then here comes Crone just like giving a little back talk, Yeah,
I think it's great that Crone shows up to Baruch before Animander Rake does, and it's like, hey, my master's coming in a bit, but why don't me and you talk for a couple minutes? Like that scene is so good. There's a scene where Crone's talking to Baruch, and it's, I don't know, I just loved the whole dynamic of it. I really, really loved it.
Here's why I love Crocus and his storyline with Chalice in this book, and just, I just as a character in total, although I find the storyline with Chalice very funny. Crocus to me is just incredibly fucking dumb. And he's super fucking misguided, and he really has no fucking clue. Almost in no scene ever does he have a clue. He's just like, I guess if I do this, everything's going to be okay now. I guess if I just follow Absalar across the ocean to a drifting island, I think it's all going to be good. I think that's what, I just saw a girl randomly once. I think I need to dedicate my life to
No, I stole from this girl. She was asleep. I think I'm falling in love with her.
Yes. This is like the exact type of like next level Crocus brain shit.
Yeah.
And
Crocus brain.
The reason I identify with so much is because I too feel the same way. I feel like I am incredibly stupid and spend all my time being like, you know what, Peter? If you just do this, I guess things are going to be okay. I should go across the ocean to a drifting island.
Yeah, you're the podcast Crocus Younghand.
No, I think the reason I like him so much is because I too feel as completely lost and purposeless as Crocus Younghand. So
yeah, I think my favorite parts about Crocus is when everybody around him is like, "Oh, it's like this," and they're like, "Yeah, it's like this. Definitely, I get this." And Crocus is like, "Hey, can someone explain to me what the fuck is happening?" Because a lot of the time he's hanging out with like Absalar and. Who is a god and Haboric and stuff.
I love scenes when Crocus sits someone's down and he's like, hey, Rallick, I figured it out. Here's what I gotta do. This is what life is. And then the other person's like, yeah, I guess. Like, what? Like, Scalar is there. Like, what on earth are you talking to? What are we doing?
Yeah.
just nothing but love for Crocus Younghand, and I'll defend him till I die, baby,
Yeah, I think he's great.
Anyway, let's talk about Krupp.
Sure.
The one, the only.
I love Krupp. I knew Krupp was the eel. I knew Krupp was a very powerful magic user. So honestly, reading this book, I was just like, I'm here for the Krupp bits. Like, nothing about his story surprised me or anything. Like, I didn't know about him like showing up to the Jagged Tyrant and, trapping him in Mianus or whatever for a hot minute. But a lot of what Krupp does in this book is be the eel. And actually, the one quote that I wrote down from this book was, nor can beggars be choosers when it comes to cheese, which is something that Krupp says that I just really loved.
He's just a welcomed character in the story.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a way that Krupp is like too much, but I don't think...
He can be too much sometimes.
Yeah, but I think the book skirts that line pretty expertly for me most of the time.
Just in this, literally, we recorded this episode 12 hours ago. That's why we keep talking about it. But in that episode, I was like losing my mind about Karsa. And I think one of my problems with Karsa is that when a scene starts, I already don't like him. And then the scene keeps going. And it doesn't stop, and I get more and more aggravated. And I believe this is how a lot of people feel about Krupp. The scene starts, and they're like, I'm not a huge Krupp fan. And then there's like 2 paragraphs of him just trying to say that's a good idea. I get people who don't jive with the eel.
Yeah, for sure. I get why you don't jive with Karsa, but I think they do jive with me for similar reasons. Because like once the scene starts, you're like, okay, I kind of know what this bit is going to be. And Krupp's is just like, he's going to talk a whole lot, say his own name. And Karsa's is like, he's going to say that it's better to be in a small village and murder everyone and think that he's always right. I think they both are on the same level for me.
So, what did you make of the circle breaker stuff? He's breaking circles, baby.
Honestly, I'm having a hard time recalling the specific circle breaker bits just because I got so much in the noggin. But I thought it was nice that Krupp lets him go live on an island at the end. I thought that was nice. Do you want to remind me of a specific thing so that...
No, I don't know. I don't feel strongly about the circle breaker plotline, but I consider it to just be this odd thing that probably means more to me than I can really articulate, you know?
What do you mean means more to you?
I just think like the book could not have him, right?
Right.
I mean, there's some things that like you find out through Circle Breaker, but the book could just not have them.
Sure.
And I think for me, then I just start to feel like I think more about like, well, what is he adding to the story and why we're breaking circles, baby, you know? So that's how I feel. I think I really like him, and I think I appreciate that storyline.
Yeah, I mean, I like the undercover bits that he has. Like, that's fun, and I think it really adds to the Assassin's Guild war or whatever, which was also it's a huge part of the book, obviously, but I really loved that stuff. Like the scenes with Ralaghnam and the other assassins just like kicking ass or getting their ass kicked just really jived with me. It was great.
Really?
And then I liked him. I don't know. I liked it. You didn't like it.
I just feel like for me, when I like the book already has so much stuff going on, and then we get to it and it's like, and in the city there's assassins and there's a bunch of assassins. I'm like, guy, I got so much on my plate. Like I'm already set on stuff.
I don't know. I feel like that added to the life of Darujistan for me. Like it's an established city with all of this other stuff going on. And like, sure, there are all these political things going on, but they're, really the Assassin's Guild are the people pulling the strings and stuff.
But there's also a cabal of mages. There's all these thieves. I already felt full up on stuff going inside Darujistan.
I don't know.
There's the Fett. There's Cotillion and Col Murillo.
It's a big city, baby. Big city, big stuff going on.
Listen, I'm glad you like it. I'm not trying to.
One thing that we haven't touched on yet is
it's because it's a whole book.
It's a whole book. I do just want to touch on Tattersail. I love her. She's great. Immediately is just like so much fun to read. I think if I didn't know what Warrens were, I would have a totally opposite opinion. But knowing how magic generally works, as soon as Tattersail is introduced and the betrayal by Tayshrin happens, like I knew what was going on. I felt like I had a firm grasp, and it was just fun to read. One thing that I do want to say is that I completely glossed over her death. Like it totally just like went right across my face. I read that scene with her, Bellerton and Nightchill, and didn't connect the dots that meant, or that she incinerated them all. So then in like a couple chapters after that, when Perrin was like, I must avenge her death, I was like, wait, what happened? So that was a fun thing for me.
It's kind of interesting that you get to see Nightchill there, and then because obviously we talked about her in Memory's Vice in that way,
Right.
And then you also see Bellerden, another character who gets referenced a lot, but is really only in Gardens of the Moon so far.
Yeah. I do love, I think I just love the idea of muscle-bound characters not punching, because I love Belladin just being this like beefed up Barghast who's casting spells and also can just like take 1,000 hits because he's a Barghast. Like, it's just so fun.
You just got muscle-bound boys for days over there, you know?
I do. I love my muscly boys, I guess.
All right. What else are we missing in Gardens of the Moon?
The one thing I did want to talk about was the actual like final climax with the Ghislaine,
Sure.
the demon.
We didn't even talk about the Testandi.
No, we didn't. They're there,
going.
and Animander
They're
Rake being a
around.
character is cool, and Moonspawn being around is very cool. All the dragons also very cool. But
Sometimes it's a real pain you haven't read all the books, you know?
sorry. Sorry, man.
No, on a read-through episode, it doesn't bother me. But when we're having kind of more loose structures, I just like want to talk about Animator Rake in entirety. But
Got it.
here we are in a weird vacuum. But,
Sorry, pal. Sorry.
oh, I live such a difficult life.
So Ghislaine, the demon, Tashrin's demon, right?
Yeah,
Is that- yeah.
Lysine unleashed it.
Lysine unleashed it. That's what it was.
Not Lysine, Lorne, the adjunct.
The adjunct. Oh my god, we didn't even talk about fucking Lorne. Lorne is such a great character.
Lorne actually rules.
I loved Lorne in this book. I did not know that she was a POV, and I was fully on board the entire time. Man, Lorne's great. And her meeting Tool and naming him Tool and doing the tyrant stuff and fucking, oh man, wow, Lorne.
Yeah, all of the Lorne stuff's great. I love that she gets so depressed at the end of her story. I love all of her travel to Talani Mass. It's just, I actually think maybe the Lorne stuff's some of the best stuff in the book.
I agree. Yeah, and I can't believe we glossed over it for 51 minutes.
Yeah, it's because it's not like it's Whiskey Jack, it's Perrin, it's sorry. It's like the headline of.
She comes up obviously in book 3 and stuff, you know, talking about comparing Tavor and, you know, Lorne and blah blah blah. But I didn't realize she was a character that we like actually ever saw do stuff. I remember hearing her name in the episodes, but I never remembered like her doing anything, I guess.
Oh, you fool, you sweet summer child.
Yeah. But so the Ghislaine, I don't know. It was just a wild thing that I didn't even know was a part of the story. And then when it was like, oh, here's this huge thing that's like tearing apart the town or tearing apart the city, and oh, also the Crimson Guard are here and they're here to save the day. I had no idea the Crimson Guard were in this book either. Just bonkers.
Is there anything you didn't like about the book?
Probably.
Probably.
Nothing that like stood out to me as like, man, this like I'm not really having a good time with this part of the book. Like I don't.
All
wanna
right,
say,
you heard it here first. 10 out of 10 book. AJ thought it was perfect.
It's not a perfect book, but I just don't have any specific thoughts about what I didn't like about it, I guess.
Well, feel no pressure then. Man, what an ill-conceived podcast. This is an impossible task to talk about like these two books, but I'm glad you read them, but maybe we should shuffle along to talk about Deadhouse Gates.
I think we should move on to talk about Deadhouse Gates. If we didn't talk about anything that you wanted us to talk about, sorry, and go listen to the first season because they talk about stuff in detail.
Seven cities.
Wow. The ASMR experience.
This is the start of it. And, you know, you came on, you talked about House of Chains, Bree and Bone Hours Now, and this is the first book in the series set there.
Yes.
Chain of dogs, baby.
Yeah.
The chain of dogs.
Chain of dogs. Turn and face the chain, you know? Yes.
You can never break the chain.
Yeah.
Would be a phrase proven untrue. So.
Yeah.
All right. What's our way into this book? Pick a way into
general thoughts
Deadhouse
about
Gates.
this book. Let me just start with big thoughts about this book. I loved this book. I had a great time with it. I think the setting of Rariku and Seven Cities is great. I love it. Good place. Fun to be, to read about. Definitely not fun to be. And I am really great. Like, when I read Gardens of the Moon, I was like, okay, cool. I'm glad I read this book. There's a lot of cool, fun character stuff in this and, introductions to characters and all this stuff. And it's neat to see the first entry in the series. Cool. When I finished this book today, I thought, man, I'm really glad I read this book, because even with the context of these characters in House of Chains, I feel like there's still so many characters that we didn't hear from in House of Chains that are in Deadhouse Gates that I think maybe we will hear from again in Bone Hunters, because it's a big book. And so a lot of stuff could happen.
No, Deadhouse Gates is a really important book.
Yeah. There's just so much good stuff in here. And I guess we start off with, I didn't even realize this. I had read this already because I read the first 10 chapters. The whole prologue is just Felison and Haboric and Bowden like being chained up and the Priest of Hood, covered in the bugs or whatever. I didn't realize that whole thing was the prologue.
I think that prologue's the best prologue in the series. It's my opinion.
Wild. It's huge, first of all. And it was great to read. It's a great introduction to this entirely new continent.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the other prologues are good, but sometimes get caught up in trying to set up too many things. It's like, well, we got to throw 6 balls in the air 10,000 years ago so that we can see how they landed all this time later when we get to the present. I mean, it's kind of setting up these storylines, often ancient ones. That's opposed to this one, which I think is just such a strong character introduction. And it's bringing us, the reader, first us introducing us to a central character of the story. And then it's bringing us from a place we already know within the Empire across the sea. We're going with her, you know, and we're kind of being forced to go to this new place with this new character. You know, I think it's such a powerful introduction to the story.
Yeah, I think it's great. It's horrific from many angles. Yeah, it starts the book off with a bang, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And I loved Felison. Felison's great. I loved Felison when I was reading it the first time, and then completing her story arc and her transition into Shaik Reborn. Just fully on board the entire time. Loved it.
So good.
Yeah. I don't... Felison haters, don't at me. Because
it's one of those things, too, that you probably had this experience of. When you're reading it the second time and you know where she's going, you know that she's going to become the head of this rebel army. Yeah. You can see how kind of everything's kind of leading to this. And it's kind of, it's all forming her into the person that becomes Shaik Reborn. Right.
She has a line when they're in Skull Cup where she just says, live to the next hour or something, which was just 100 arrows to my sweet, tender heart. Just because, knowing where she ends up and stuff. It's just woof,
It was actually safer for her to go there. It was the only choice.
Stop. She was supposed to leave sooner. Bowden says that, but she didn't.
Yeah, I know. I'm just being a goon. But anyway. So Felison has this whole journey. It's also the introduction to Haboric, and you spend time with Bowden, who's a character you obviously haven't really read for any reason. What'd you think of her companions in Bowden and Haboric? Especially, this is the most lucid we see Haboric compared to, especially compared to Bone Hunter's Haboric, who's just sending it.
Fully off the rocker. Like I said, I read the first 10 chapters, so I had a pretty good grasp of the relationship between these three. And I think reading it, the first time, I was way more at a point after they escape Skull Cup and they're walking through the desert. Felison and Bowden's relationship to me felt more sibling-y, they're just ribbing each other, being mean on purpose. But having listening to you're making a face. Listening to Ralph Lister read it, it's just they both sound like they're so full of hate. So maybe when I was reading it the first time, I was being way too generous, but that was a noticeable difference for me.
Yeah, I would not describe the relationship as siblingly, but
it's definitely not siblingly. I don't think their relationship is. I just think at a certain point, they were both just trying to say the meanest thing they possibly could to each other.
Yeah, well, that's stuff true.
And when I read that, I was like, oh, they're both they're in on the bit. They're both just trying to be really mean to each other just 'cause. But when I was listening to Ralph Lister read it. It's like, oh no, these two hate each other, like in a real way.
I don't think they hate each other, but
that was what it sounds like when Ralph reads it. Okay.
Well, this is what Ralph's interpretation of it was.
And I mean, I guess I could go on a tangent, not a tangent, but I could talk about the difference between audiobook and actual book, but I won't. So, what are the important parts of this book? The Path of Hands.
No, well, there's a bunch of other stuff, but I want to come to Mappo and Ikariam, considering we're reading Bone Hunters now, which is your probably most we've read of them so far. Of course, we counted them by chance in House of Chains, but here they are as like central characters, and they go through this whole cycle, which of course we know they've kind of been through before, right?
And that they are going through again.
It's almost like it's the point anyway.
Yeah.
Going.
I don't know. I think my feelings about them in the beginning of Bone Hunters, if you want to know my feelings on Mappo and Ikariam, you just listen to the first Bone Hunters episode, because I feel the same way. I like them both. It's tragic. They're fun to be around because they're just two big boys swinging swords good. I do love, though, one of the touches that I love is that Mappo has, using D&D terms, has a bag of holding. And he actually, they reference it in the most recent Bone Hunters episode, or Bone Hunters chapters, where he takes a big bag out of his smallest bag, and then a bigger bag out of that one, puts a tent in the biggest bag, and then puts that into a smaller bag, is something that happens in the Bone Hunters chapters we just read. And I thought that was very funny and a good way to travel. Good job, Mappo.
I exclusively imagine Mappo Trell as a Goron from Ocarina of Time. This is my exclusive image of him.
Yeah, he's kind of got Goron vibes, right? Like, I imagine Ikariam as like a very tall, big man, just like a man scaled up. But
no,
Mappo,
I use the description of Ikariam to imagine him. But
what do you mean?
Well, like, he's got tusks. He's kind of this like half jagged, half, and he's like taller but not Mappo. Goron, baby.
Yeah, Mappo's a stout, weird man with a pointy head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to put a soft pin in Mappo and Ikariam, like, some of my favorite characters are the characters that are older than anything. And when they talk, it's just like, they're just like saying words like, the stars and it's just like really heady stuff. And that's part of the reason I love Troll and Onrak so much. Part of the reason I love Tool so much. Part of the reason, it's why I love Mappo and Ikariam so much, is because just everything they say is so far removed from, what's happening around them, because they're measuring time in centuries instead of hours,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You just want to talk about the rest of the series?
Yep. So let's look at Crocus and Apsalar, who are drawn. They're like one of the few through lines. Of course, they come with Kalam and Fiddler to 7 cities, and they all eventually they go their separate ways. But what did you make of Crocus and Apsalar in this book? Since they probably are the two. I mean, you read them back to back, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think them meeting in Guards on the Moon carrying over into this book, where Apsalar very much just goes from Fisher Girl straight into like, oh, I am also half god, so don't fuck with me. Like, there is no in between. There is no transition period. It is just like, I am girl, and then I am memories of a god. Which,
I disagree, bro. I feel like this is the transition period compared to where she is later on.
Well, sure.
She's like grappling and has these memories within her. She's much more reserved here than she is in House of Chains, Bone Hunters.
Yes, I guess. But I mean, even in this book, she's still talking about Cotillian's memories. She's like talking about things that he remembers. I don't know. I guess this is the transition period. But to me, it just felt like my initial feeling was like little girl to god murderer. But I liked following their quest, I guess. Something that really blew my mind about this book is how many of the characters' paths crossed. Like,
oh, yeah.
At one point, it seemed like I kept getting confused because I was just like, wait a minute, I thought this person was just with Hiborik, and I thought this person was just with Ikariam and Mappo, and it's just like everybody overlaps at one point or another, and I don't know, that's just was really cool and interesting to me because like they're constantly talking about how big the desert is. And like, you know, the Jagodan is this huge desert that, you know, people die in and all this stuff. And like, here we are, every single character trips over Culp's foot, you know, it's just like it was good and I liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I increasingly think maybe Deadhouse Gates is one of the best books in this series. You know?
Yeah, I am really honestly dreading you asking me for my definitive rating because...
Well, the thing is, here's the thing. The definitive rating is just like a fun thing to do on the show.
Yeah, I know.
Obviously, books is like it's not really how, and it's not really that meaningful to do that. But of course, it's always fun to pick favorites, you know.
Yeah.
That's what my father always says. So
wow.
Anyway, Crocus has got it all figured out, you know. If I just escort this girl across the ocean to her home, then in fact I think things are going to be good.
Yeah, and when my two friends say that they're sailing south for I don't know some reason, I'm just going to say yeah, sure. I guess that works.
Sure, I guess we are taking a detour across another continent over foot. I mean, I guess so, bro.
I mean, hey, it's your boat.
Sure.
Come on, man. So funny.
So let's talk about Kalam. His storyline ends with, like, I think an amazing scene with him and Lucine and this kind of, like, talk out weird whole thing. What you make of Kalam in this book?
I love that ending scene. I just gotta say, I hated the whole Ragstopper saga. I thought that it blew so hard.
What do you mean?
I was totally uninvested at anything happening on the Ragstopper. Maybe because I know that in the long run it does not matter at all. It just sucked the life out of me every time we would go back to the Ragstopper. Truly.
I basically fully agree with you. I mean, okay. I think it's all fun and all, you know. It's like when you think about it, it's like, oh, then Kalam gets on a pirate ship and there's this captain and there's the sharks.
Well, it's a similar thing in House of Chains too. He's just like on a quest. Like he's just doing his own thing regardless of what everybody else is doing.
To me, it just like reeks of temporary conflict. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't care. We're just doing questing right now. You know, we're on this boat and like, this isn't what the story's about.
He could have gotten on the Ragstopper in book 2, not been in book 3 at all, and then gotten off the Ragstopper in book 4, and I would have felt the same about his story. Like I think I would have liked his story more.
Listen, it's not a huge deal. It's not like the Ragstopper thing's forever, right?
No,
it's like a few chapters, right?
Yeah.
But I and that's why I really don't care for Kalam's storyline in House of Chains. When it's just Kalam on a venturing quest, this is not my cup of tea, you know?
At least in House of Chains, when he's fighting that demon, it all happens in one chapter, or the whatever he wakes up at the bottom of that well. Like that happens over like 2 chapters, maybe. It just felt like the Ragstopper just went on forever. And I think maybe it was just because we were out on a boat. And so like the setting was like, you know, this big, like it was Happy Meal sized. So it was really it was asking the supporting cast on the boat to do a lot of lifting. And I didn't care about any of them.
Yeah, I don't want to rag on it because it's like, it's not the biggest. No, I agree. Like, I agree with everything you're saying. It's just, I don't know. It's not a deal breaker because it just makes up a tiny part of it, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
It doesn't make me stoked, you know? So
yeah, but everything outside of that, I loved his, you know, siege of the fucking city, you know, traveling through the shadows and killing all the claws and stuff. That was wild. And I loved everything before that. When, you know, oh my God, what does he do? See, that's what happens. There's Kalam and Culp, and they both live in the same spot in my brain. And I keep thinking, like, was Kalam on the boat that went through the Warren? And I don't remember.
No.
Okay, thank you. What does he do early in the book? Never mind, it doesn't matter. But
Kalam starts the book traveling with Fiddler and Crocus and Absalar. Right. And then eventually they go their separate ways.
Yeah. Where does he go after that? That's where I'm losing it.
He
meets Manala and does the yeah. That part's great. I love
it's Keneb's introduction. Manala gets introduced.
Yeah, when he goes to the bandit camp, does all that shit. It's great. It's a great time. It's so much fun to read.
That stuff I actually really like. Yeah. Maybe it's because I care more about those characters.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was really the boat did a disservice to the whole thing because the possibilities for new things being introduced on the Ragstopper were so small. Like, I kept praying for a Denrabi to show up.
Which is why I think, like, obviously the book's trying to take this pivot into, like, what's the deal with this captain? Let's do suspense stuff, you know? We're, like, on a closed setting, so we can't really do questing adventure stuff. We need to, like, have a mystery type of suspense bomb ticking thing.
It's just interesting.
But I just don't think it jives for me. Anyway, let's talk about the Chain of Dogs.
Yeah, baby.
Starting with Diker, one of my favorite characters.
Duiker. Love him.
But that's how they say it in the audiobook.
That is
right?
how they say it in the audiobook. And every time I heard it, I said, that's wrong. Because they also say Tista Andi and Tista Idur. Just wild.
So the Duiker, if you will.
Yeah.
What'd you make of the Imperial Historian?
I mean, I loved him. I think he's great. I think his whole arc is great. His little undercover bit's really good. But him being a historian amongst all of these soldiers, even only having read the first 10 chapters of this book while reading 3, 4, and 5, I always thought that perspective was so interesting. To have somebody kind of outside the battles, you know, seeing everything happen. Because it's, you know, kind of an audience surrogate, and I don't have to, like, I don't know. It was just, I really jived with it, and I had a great time. And seeing his transition from being this objective observer to becoming, you know, everybody calls him a soldier at the end, and to kind of becoming Coltane's number 2, sorry, Bolt, is just really great. His arc is so good.
Yeah, I fully agree. I love his perspective amongst the soldiers. Knowing where the Chain of Dogs storyline was headed, do you think that affected how you read it this time?
It absolutely did. I don't think it super did, because, like, I don't know, in a way, either they were going to make it to Aaron and they were going to live, or they were going to make it to, or they weren't going to, you know, make it to Aaron, they were going to die. And I think either way, all the stuff that happens along the way is still really good. And I don't think it really affected my feelings about that at all. I had a great time, you know, reading all the Coltane stuff, reading all the Duiker stuff, and all the Chain of Dogs stuff. It's just all very fun and good to read. But I definitely don't think it had the impact that it would have if I, you know, hadn't known their fate. But even so, I didn't know the specifics of it. Like, when they were approaching Aaron, I was like, oh man, these gates are going to be closed and everybody's going to get slaughtered. I didn't realize that they make it into Aaron and then see Corbeil-Adam's army, you know, just destroy the Vanguard. It was just
slay the dogs, if you will.
Yeah. I won't, but I get what you're saying. Yeah, it was just really, really heartbreaking still, but it definitely didn't hit me as hard as I think it would have if I hadn't known going in.
We also say, I mean, obviously, when you're reading these books, Coltane, so the books you've read, Coltane has kind of been this martyred figure.
Yeah.
But here you are with Coltane himself. What did you make of reading of this kind of now legendary figure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was great. It was a similar feeling to reading Gardens of the Moon and, like, getting our introduction to Perrin, honestly. Just, like, seeing the beginnings of this character. And I mean, I guess not beginnings, because he was already a fist by the time we meet him, but just, like, meeting him and seeing him whip the 7th into shape, or the 9th, who is it? Whoever it is. They're doing all the training, and, you know, List keeps dying in the trainings and stuff, and then Duiker does his whole thing. Like, I just think that whole storyline is really, really good and really, really jives with me in a big way. Yeah?
Yeah.
You just want to talk about the rest of the series?
No, it's just sad they all die.
It is. It's so fucking sad, man. Oof. It's really rough. Really, really rough. Man, and, like, I didn't know the specifics of, like, Pormqual and Nethbara. Like, those dudes suck. Like, Nethbara blows chunks, and Duiker kicking his throat in on his horse is really good. Like, fuck that guy. Fuck Pormqual. Like, woof.
All right. Unless you have any specific takes, I think we should request people at you, talk to you on the Discord, and I want to get some bigger thoughts as we try and talk about what you think reading these two books do they inform what you've read so far in 3, 4, and 5? And what do you think that'll mean now that you've actually read all these 5 books going to the second half of the series?
I think reading Gardens of the Moon has just given me a lot of context for like the beginnings of these relationships in terms of the series between a lot of these characters, especially the Bridgeburners and stuff. But like also seeing Shadowthrone and Cotillion like kind of start their ascendancy, I thought was really good, and I think that'll color my reading of them throughout the rest of the series. But I don't think I got a whole lot out of it. Like, I think it does a great job of setting up the world and setting up, you know, all this stuff, but I don't think in the long run, I don't want to say I'm not glad that I read it, because obviously I'm glad I read it. It's part of the series, but like, I don't think this is like perspective changing or anything. But I mean, keep in mind though, I have the whole podcast also, you know, in my brain as well. So I can't really say if I was missing out.
I would say it's tough because I don't think you didn't read the book in a normal way, right?
Yeah.
Not only is the podcast a part of the equation, you also read 3, 4, 5. So
right.
I kind of get what you're saying.
Yeah, I more enjoyed reading Gardens of the Moon because it was like, this maybe is something. Like, I noticed this thing, which is, it's so, I feel so kind of frustrated because like rereading Gardens of the Moon, I imagine it's like rife with stuff happening, you know, that affects the end of the series. But for me, it's like, oh, I know that word. I don't know what it means, but I know that word and I know it's there. Like, you know, just all the talk of chaos definitely set off some alarm bells, but I don't know what it means. I have no idea. But yeah, so that's my Gardens of the Moon thoughts. But Deadhouse Gates, I definitely think I will benefit from having read this book, because like I said, I read House of Chains and like I got, you know, the Shaik Reborn stuff and the Leoman Toblakai stuff and you know, all the other stuff that's in House of Chains, but I didn't really know anything about Duiker. We didn't really know anything about Coltane. I didn't really know anything about Mappo and Icarium. So having these characters be fully fleshed out in this book, I think is really going to, you know, it's obviously going to have a positive impact on this book, at least on Bone Hunters, because I think a lot of this stuff is coming back.
Honestly, going into Bone Hunters, I was most eager for you to read Deadhouse Gates, because I think House of Chains is not a great introduction to Seven Cities setting.
It's definitely not.
And a lot of Deadhouse Gates is really important for House of Chains, and that through line continues into Bone Hunters. So I think, of course, that Gardens of the Moon Imperial politics, kind of that foundational stuff is pretty important, but I was definitely having more of an eye on, like, you should definitely finish Deadhouse Gates before we get to Seven Cities.
I definitely got that feeling, like having come like halfway through Deadhouse Gates, I'm like, oh, I'm really going to benefit from having read this book. Now that, like, because we started Bone Hunters while I was also reading Deadhouse Gates. So, you know, similar setting and all this stuff, it really was just fully clicking in my brain. I love the setting of Seven Cities. Just, it's so good.
I think it's the best setting. I don't know. I know I just said that about
you just said that, yeah.
They're just settings of two different scales. Do you know what I mean? I don't think a single city on Seven Cities is as interesting as Druidistan, but as a setting for an entire book, I think Seven Cities is like a better continent than Canada.
I just think the cultures and the continent itself being a character, you know, like the desert being this oppressive thing that's like always around. Like they do that with Darujistan too. Like Darujistan is this, like, you know, bustling city full of life. All this stuff is happening underground and blah, blah, blah. But like to have that maximized, you know, like times a million or whatever, into a continent, I think is just, it's wild and it's great.
It's like New York is the fifth character.
Fuck. I do just want to say there's a lot of stuff that happens at the very end of Deadhouse Gates that, oh man, I'm thinking about the Epigraphs episode where Josh asked you if we know who Gothos is, because at the end of this book, Crocus and Apsalar and Fiddler all meet this chained up Jag, and Apsalar asks, "Are you Gothos?" And then they're teleported out of that warren, which is just fucking blew my whole head off.
I thought Josh asked me about Fisher Keltath.
No, I'm pretty sure he said, "Do we know who is?" He said, I think he's asked if Gothos was a person.
Well, Gothos is a person.
Gothos is a person, that's for sure.
Oh yeah, because we talked about Gothos's folly.
Right? Yeah, because that's yeah. oh man, the Erpenrud stuff, taking Duiker off his crucifix and like taking his soul and stuff, was so wild. Not wild. I didn't even know who Erpenrud were. Like, I didn't know who these characters were. And so I read that, and then I went and I read the epilogue of Memories of Ice when we are reintroduced to Duiker in this, in this story, I guess. And like, it didn't even register because I didn't know that he was like torn to bits, having been hung up on this crucifix. Like, when we meet him in Memories of Ice, they're all talking about like, oh, he hasn't spoken in a while, but Baruch says it's not like a physical thing. Like, we put all his pieces back where they're supposed to be. He just isn't talking. And so for him to be this like, torn apart mess of a man, is just even wilder to me. Yeah, that's just nuts. I don't know. It's nuts.
I'm really losing my mind over here. One of these, like, I am really starting to be at the point where I'm like, well, we're like a bit into book 6. So that means we're almost done book 7, which soon means we'll be done book 9. So I can start talking about these things. Yeah. Because we're 2 years in and I still can only talk about half of the series, Sorry, pal. It's good. It's just like especially I think when we're talking about in this broader way, like, what does book 2 mean compared to book 6, compared to like what it means all these 10 books? I am even more eager to just like, because we're not talking about one scene where Ikariam was doing this, Right. It's like, let's talk about Deadhouse Gates and what this book means, Yeah. But you're glad you read book 2.
I'm really glad I read book 2.
A little cooler on book 1.
Yeah, I mean, book 1 it's a good book. It was fun to read. I had a great time. But book 2 is at least immediately like benefiting me from reading. Like, maybe I'll feel differently about Gardens of the Moon, the farther I get. But immediately I am reaping the benefits of book 2. I'm excited to see what happens to Ikariam. I'm excited to see, there's a baby pregnant with Coltane's soul or something. Or sorry, the baby's not pregnant. The baby has Coltane's soul or whatever. So fucking that. And Sormo got taken by all the butterflies. So I'm really hoping that at least one of those characters will come back in this book in some capacity. In Bone Hunters, I should say. But yeah, I had a great time with these first 2 books. So thank you for telling me to read them.
I'm glad you read them, and I'm glad that we're all set up to kind of go into the second half of this series and absolutely crush it.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, buddy, boy.
What is this, 2014?
Nice. Remember that? That was a time in our lives. Anyway, I think that's going to about do it for us here today on the show. Thanks for listening, everybody. Yeah. I know it's kind of a weird one, kind of a roaming about episode in a lot of ways, but I think we both had fun, and I'm glad we got to kind of put a button on it now that AJ's on the show.
Woohoo. I'm excited to be on the show for the rest of the ride. I do just want to say thank you for waiting the extra couple days for this episode. We're recording this on the Friday that the episode normally would come out. So thanks for waiting. And if you have things that you want to talk about, because I know there's stuff that we missed, if you want to know my feelings on things, I'm in the Discord. You can @ me on Twitter if you want. So that's that. Thanks.
I'm really excited for this new season, bro.
I am also. Well, I don't know why I said it like that. I am as well. That was even worse somehow. I'm also excited for this new season. This book is already off to a great start. Just like giving my friends a big old hug, seeing all my good friends again. And I'm hoping I will see some of my new good friends again later in this book.
Who knows?
I mean, you explicitly do.
I do. Awesome.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Next week is our interview with Steve about Midnight Tides. Let us know what you think of the show. 10 Very Big Books on Twitter and Gmail. And take it away.